selected this photograph, which was one I took several years ago of a bouquet of colorful tulips in my studio. And I thought, oh, this will be the perfect bouquet to paint in April. And it has even more of a significant meaning today because our landscape here in central New York is now covered with about 7 inches, or we computed it this morning, 18 centimeters of snow. So the tulips that I had in the garden outdoors, they're buried. So working from a subject like this on a day like today is, I think, especially uplifting. And I did enjoy reading in the chat that it's sunny in Colorado and a couple of other places. So I'm glad spring has sprung in some places on the globe. Now, the reason I selected this was because it has a variety of hue, which means color, and it also has a variety of value. And that then as a subject gives us a lot of opportunities to dig in to our pastel palette and use different pigments. So that was my motivation initially. There are two takeaways that I hope you will leave with at the close of the session today. And the first is the significance of value in understanding a subject matter and in composing it as a painting. And that is why in the folder that is available to you, you have this black and white reproduction of the bouquet so that we can isolate the lights and the darks from one another and readily see those value differences. So value refers to the relative light or darkness of a form. And the form can be two-dimensional, it can be three-dimensional. But when we're talking about darks and lights, the word that I use is value. So the values in here are varied. I would call this a broad value range composition. And the value distinction is going to be determined by two things. The first is the local color of the forms. Some colors are just going to be lighter than other colors. And that's certainly true of yellows, of yellow greens here. Of course, the cloth is a tint of a yellow green. But the reds are going to be inherently darker in value than the yellow, but perhaps a little lighter in value than that of the red violet in this context. So we're anticipating, yeah, there is going to be a value difference in this, and it's going to be based on the color, the local color of each of the elements. But the other thing that's going to determine value is the position of the light source, where the illumination is coming from on this particular composition. And I think it's important whenever you're working from life that you identify where the light is emanating from, because that's going to affect your subject. You're going to have lights, you're going to have darks that will be because of the position of the light source. And in this particular instance, we have the light coming from the upper right, and it's flowing down over the arrangement of tulips. So the side of the tulip that's facing the light source, for the most part, the upper right, is in illumination as compared to the part of the tulip that's turning away from the light source. So we go from light to dark, we go from light to dark. Well, so that's because of the light source. The light is filtering over the tulips, some of the tulips kind of randomly sticking out of the vase. So we've got an umbrella kind of shielding this daisy on the bottom and shielding this one over here. We're not getting enough light to illuminate this daisy, which is as yellow and as light in value as this one is, but we're not seeing it that way based on its position in relationship to the rest of the bouquet of tulips. We're also getting some lovely cast shadows. There's a nice one up here from the red violet tulip onto the yellow, another one over here, right there, another one on the red violet tulip right here. And that's all because, we're getting those tulips blocking the light from falling on another tulip. So that is all based on the light source. Another nice cast shadow coming off the bottom of the vase at the base. So I think no matter what you're painting, whether it's a landscape or a still life, it's helpful to take a moment and look at your subject and kind of think about where the light's coming from and how that is creating value differences and how that's creating shadows. Because we're going to need all of that if we're describing form. So we could think about value then, these lights and darks, as a means of describing the form. I mean, that's the structure. That's what we can use to articulate the three-dimensionality of the form. Much in the same way that a writer would use adjectives to describe each of these tulips. So I want to think about maybe our value differences. Those are like adjectives that are creating the three-dimensional quality of each of the tulips, as well as maybe alluding to the fact that the surface of the tulip is very satiny and it's bouncing the light off of it in a highlighted area. So value is really important. Now we have other stuff that's going on here because of the light and because of the local color of the tulips. We have reflected lights. We have examples of warm lights and cooler shadows. And we'll talk about that once we get going, once we start working. For now, though, I want to take one more look at our photograph that we're going to be working from, and make some decisions about our composition. When I photographed this some years ago, I actually did it, to have a reference photo. So it's not a well-composed photograph. I've got a lot of studio clutter on the top, and I'm going to eliminate that in my painting. I don't see the reason for putting that in. And I'm also running the bottom of the vase almost right at a tangent, right at the end of the photographic edge. And I think that's very awkward. That pulls our eye out to the edge of the picture plane and we kind of fall off the edge. So I'm going to change the composition a little bit. And I'm actually, in my painting that I'm going to be doing with you, I'm going to move the vase up like I have here. So it'll be more like this. And then also, I don't want to center it kerplunk in the middle of the picture plane like it is here. I'm going to move it over to the right a little bit so that we have more space here to introduce a different color, different value, to make the background a little bit more lively, a little bit more varied, a little bit more interesting. The other decision I want to make from the get-go, that I will be modifying as I work, is that I want to allow myself to leave some information that is contained in these photographs out of my painting. I don't want to include every bit of detail. That is not something that I aspire to as a painter. My work tends to be more representation or more impressionistic. I'm not interested in all of the facts. I really want to celebrate the vitality of color in this composition, and not become overwhelmed by all of the subtle details. But that's my decision. I want to encourage you to work however you are comfortable with, as much information, as many details as you want to include. Please do include them. But for example, this vase, and I think if you have printed the photo, you might be able to pick up the scalloped edge on the vase. It is a detail that I don't think is necessary, that I find a bit too fussy, and I can just see myself fussing over it and making a lot out of it, and I think it would detract from the integrity of the color and the color experience elsewhere in the composition. Similarly, I think I'm going to be a little loose and vague about the stems in the vase itself. Um, I'm not going to maybe articulate them or describe them with the degree of information that I'm going to be introducing in the rest of the composition. So I'm going to be, and I'll be making those decisions as I work, but I want to be aware from the beginning that I'm not going to put everything in. Now, having just mentioned this vase, when I photographed this, I was above it, looking down into the composition, so I can see into the tops of some of the tulips. If we took out this little daisy here, I could almost see into the top of that of the circular vase, the round 360-degree opening in the top of this round vase. I do pick up the beautiful ellipse of the water level on the vase here. And I've alluded to it just very slightly in this painting. There also is a bit of an ellipse at the bottom of where the stems all stop in the bottom of the vase. And I've alluded to that. There's a bit of the ellipse of the circular base of the vase visible right here. And those are important ellipses because they ground the vase onto the picture plane. And they tell us that it's below our eye level, that I'm positioned above it, looking down on the vase. So we've got this smile of an ellipse on the bottom of the vase. So these are all kind of things to scope out before we start working. And what we're going to do next up, I'm going to put up a clean piece of paper, and we're going to begin our session by doing a simple contour drawing to kind of plot out where this composition is going to be on the picture plane. So that's why making the composition decisions are pretty important now. But we're going to do this with fine charcoal or whatever drawing material you have, ideally one that will allow you to make mistakes and correct them. Because I think the process of working for me is always one that I want to be kind of an evolutionary process where I can put things down and tweak them, change them, make decisions, build on what I've done. And I like using charcoal as a medium to do an initial sketch because I can change it. So having said that, what I'm going to be working on is the same paper that I'm working on here, and that I did the practice painting that you have in that folder. And it is a sheet of UArt 500 pastel paper, which is a pretty toothy paper. It's got a good grit. It can take multiple layers of pastel. It can also take a water-based underpainting with acrylic or watercolor. You can also wash in an application of dry pastel and then liquefy it with water or with denatured or rubbing alcohol. So it works well. The only thing I really don't like about it is it tends to roll up. I buy it in big sheets and I cut it into smaller sheets, and after a time it kind of rolls. It's not a heavy piece of paper, but it's a workhorse piece of paper. And I'm going to be working on the buff UArt paper in just a moment. And it is, I think it's a good paper to use for my particular type of pastels. I want you to select a paper that works for you for your type of pastel. I want you to choose a paper that will allow you to put as much or as little pastel on the surface as you're comfortable with. There's lots of papers out there. I think for softer pastels, as I think I wrote in the supply description, you're going to want to have a toothier paper so you can add more pigment. If you're working with harder pastel, that's not really necessary. The hard pastels like Rembrandt, Holbein, they work well on a smoother paper. They work beautifully on a toothy paper too. So whatever you've got, whatever you're comfortable with, is great to work on. But I want to throw something else in the mix. And this is kind of a teaser for the second takeaway that I hope you will leave with today. And that is the dynamic quality of color. And we're going to talk more about that after we do the sketch. But for now, I just want to put this in your mind. Color will change. It'll look very different, one color, in two different contexts. Color is never going to be absolute from one situation to another situation. Case in point, here is, let's see if we can hold this up. This is a beautiful Sennelier soft pastel, highly saturated. It's got a lot of punch to it. It's a red-orange pastel. It's really, really lovely. And I think there you go. You can kind of see it. I'm going to make a mark on it with, on this is Le Carte, a green sheet of Le Carte paper, which is a toothy paper. Many of you know it, I'm sure. It's a little smoother in feel than the tooth on this UArt, but let's just do that. And let's do the same thing here. And can you see the difference in the two reds? Even from a distance, I think we get a sense that the red on the darker, greener paper is much lighter in value because it's in a darker context. It also has a brilliance or a saturation that's wonderfully lively, in my opinion. This is all subjective. The red mark on the UArt buff paper is a little bit darker in value and doesn't have the vibrancy, the buoyancy almost, that it has in this one. So I'm just throwing this out at this point in our discussion because it's time to choose your support, to make the decision as to what you're going to be working on. And that support, that paper, whether it's buff and light, or whether it's white, or whether it's gray, or whether it's green, or it's red, or it's purple, that's going to set you up for a very distinct experience as you work. And then the ultimate end product is going to have a very distinct character. And I think it's fun, to dive into working on different papers. I like working on buff paper. I often do, probably most of the time I do. But it's fun to work on a darker paper or a lighter paper or a colored paper. It changes the context of your pastels in your palette. So they will behave differently, on a paper like this than they will on a paper like this. So let's move on here. And what I have taped to my board here is the piece of UArt. Maybe you can see it's kind of wants to roll up a wee bit.
Can you say what size you've used, please, Mary?
Yeah, I will. This is 8. So the photograph is rather small, maybe 8 by 10, 8.5 by 11. In centimeters, maybe that's 18 by, maybe 25, something like that. This is 18 inches high. That would translate to 45 centimeters high. So the height is greater than what it is in the photo. I like working a little larger. The width is about 12 inches, so that would be about 30 centimeters. So it's about twice as high as the photograph. I'm comfortable with that proportion, but I want to encourage you to work with any size that you're kind of comfortable working. And hopefully that will give you a space to explore different colors. I have an extra strip I kind of taped there just so I would be able to experiment later when I start applying color and see, how the colors behave next to one another. Harkening back to that second takeaway that I will elaborate more on in a little bit about the dynamic quality of color. So it's great to have a tester area. So I know I'm going to just work from the black and white one here, but I'm going to want these tulips up kind of high on the picture plane because I want to have enough space to move that vase up from the bottom of the edge of the paper. And I'm starting in with fine charcoal, just outlining the contour of the tulips. So I'm starting in the upper left here. And I just kind of want to plot them in at this point and get them generally in the right spot, get them generally the right proportion. This is also a wonderful kind of opportunity to get to know my subject. I'm kind of looking everywhere at once. This is the red tulip right there. Here is the red tulip. You can hear.
Should we be working with you or will you be pausing?
I will pause when I'm done doing this to give you all a chance to catch up. But if you want to get started, when you feel comfortable starting, I will be talking about doing some comparison in just a minute, but I have to get more on the picture plane before I can do that. But I really just want to outline, kind of plot out where the general shapes are going to go right now. So I'm not being very precise. I'm looking for general relationships. Where is the bottom of this yellow tulip right there in relationship to the position or tulip, daisy, right here on the lower left, the one that's in shadow? Where is the bottom of that in relationship to the daisy in the center? I can make a line. It actually lines up with the center of that flower stem there. And it looks like I already moved. Initially, I made a mark right here, putting the bottom of the vase right at that point. But when I start comparing it to the location of this daisy, I'm seeing that it needs to come up a tiny bit. So that's what I mean by making comparisons, of looking for, the whole thing needs to come up. Looking for relationships, the position of one tulip in relationship to another. Move that one up. I'm a little out of whack here. This down here. So the thing I like about vine charcoal, I can take something like this pan pastel sponge and I can lift some of it out and redraw, reposition my, my marks. And all of this will be readily covered up with pastel. So this is a great kind of foundation to work out the position of all of these forms. And it's one that I can easily modify. I can easily correct as I'm, as I'm working. So let's go back here again. Here's our red tulip in the center. There's the red tulip that's kind of leaning off to the right. There's the tucked away yellow one. This has to go over more. So rather than thinking about each of these tulips as individual kind of entities, I'm really looking at relationships. And I'm looking at negative spaces. A negative space would be the background space that's between this red tulip in the back on top of the yellow tulip. And then it kind of wedges up alongside this red violet tulip. So that's about in the right spot. So I did have those pretty much in the where I thought they would be. But again, this is just a guide, and I know that I will undoubtedly make more precise corrections, if you will, because I don't see that I've got all of this necessarily in the right spot. Things to do when you're organizing a composition. For example, I can look at the top of this red violet tulip that's leaning over. Maybe if I got the color sample out, it'd be easier for you to see right here. I can look at the top of this red violet tulip and I can compare its location to this red tulip and to the bottom of this red tulip. And let's see if I have it in the right spot. On the photograph, it intersects sort of the middle of that red tulip. That's pretty cool, that works. And then it pretty much is right at the bottom of this. So that's okay. I have that pretty much in the right location. If you can see that, it's very loose, very general. I'm looking for things like relationships. If I imagine I'm a little ant and I'm crawling down the edge of this red tulip here, which meets up with the red tulip in front of it, and then meets up with the top of this violet tulip right there. And then it kind of comes down and it's a diagonal move down to the yellow tulip. So I think I'll move the yellow one over a little bit. The red violet tulip that's tucked away, it then kind of it's creviced back in under this red tulip. So I'm gonna kind of reference that back left corner, kind of comes out again, another beautiful diagonal. There's the stem. And then this tulip, this yellow tulip, kind of shoots out from behind it and does something like this. And then there's our vase. Where is the edge of the neck of the vase in relationship to the red violet tulip? It's pretty much aligned with it. So it's about right there, pretty much where I had it. We also have the daisy shooting out over here, which is it's really a combination of different rather light values, but the stem, there is a negative space, a little peekaboo of the background yellow-green that we see peeking through the two stems, one of the yellow tulip, one of the yellow daisy, and then the yellow daisy does something like this. We're just gonna outline it in a very simple fashion. I'm not gonna be too fussy about that. I'm gonna redraw the daisy underneath. Actually, where is the center of the daisy underneath in relationship to the tulips above it? It's really just about the right side is aligned with the left side of this red violet tulip. You see that? It's right there. The left side is aligned almost with the edge of the red tulip here. So pretty much where I had it. But even if I didn't get it in the right spot, that's okay. But I think acknowledging these relationships in terms of position is important initially. Make these comparisons. Don't think so much about daisy, 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 tulip, tulip, tulip. Look for edge relationships. Where is the like the edge of this center of the daisy in relationship to the red violet tulip. And then if I carry that vertical, that imaginary vertical, all the way up to the top of my composition, what would we intersect up top? We would intersect actually the, maybe the right quarter of the red tulip up on top. So it's pretty much in the right spot. So by looking for these position relationships, you really can pinpoint where your individual tulips need to be relative to one another as they are in the photograph that we're working from. I want to get a little bit more detail down here before we stop for a moment, making sure now's the time to really get the bugs out of the system with regards to position. And I do see, look at the diagonal here coming off the red violet tulip on the left. The bottom of that is maybe halfway through the middle of the red tulip. You see that? So there's a relationship there we can draw upon. I don't have it there. It needs to go up higher. So the bottom of the red violet tulip on the left, which is a lovely dark hue, really does need to go up. There's the leaf. There's the red tulip. Comes down like this, moves up like that. The right side of this red violet tulip is pretty much aligned with the middle of the red violet tulip up here. So actually the top of this tulip didn't change, but the bottom needed to be repositioned. Okay. So, this is like when I was back in school and my teachers in math class would always want me to show my work. Well, I'm showing you my work. I mean, I'm really making evident here my process of looking, of searching and looking for, there's a nice leaf there, of the relationships of these various forms and letting these lines exist on the page. I'm going to cover them all up but it's helping me to see relationships. I'm kind of leaving a trail as I do that. The left side of the vase is aligned with the edge of this tulip, so right here. Where is the ellipse comes down like this, the water level ellipse. We've got general shapes of darks here. Water level ellipse does this. The bottom of the vase does this. And once again, I end up moving the vase up. The cast shadow is going to come off like this, and so forth. So I pretty much have an idea of where I'm going to put this. Now, you know, I could have moved this over a little further still. And, you know, I could easily do that now by rubbing it all out. That would be quite possible to move it all over to the right. In the interest of time, I'm not. I want to move on because we have only a certain amount of time to work on this today. I've pre-selected 3 different trays of my pastels from my larger palette, anticipating what I will need to render the color families that I see in our subject today. In looking at this, I think you get a sense I've got a lot of different pastels. Some of them still have their wrappers, but not all of them. Some of them are in little tiny pieces, which are very convenient, especially when you're working outdoors. They are all soft pastels. Some of them are much softer than others, but they're soft pastels. I like softer pastels. They suit my temperament. I do have a variety of them, a variety of manufacturers, because I buy them for their colors. I'm not brand loyal to any one company, though I do have a favorite. My current favorite is this particular product. It's a Blue Earth pastel. It comes this size, unwrapped. It's a newer pastel on the market. It's only existed since about 2012. It's from Minnesota. It's sold through an art supply in Washington state called Dakota. And it really is a great product. Now, what I like about it too is many of the sets are organized in terms of value. So they will be, like, for example, I recently purchased the lemon set, and it is organized in terms of light lemon greens, yellow greens, and dark yellow greens, as well as more saturated yellow greens and more muted yellow greens. And we saw an example of a saturated color when we were looking at this Sennelier, the red with a little bit of orange bias. But in looking at my arrangement here of yellows and yellow greens, we also see a saturation difference. And we certainly see this light dark value difference, which I'm anticipating using when I describe the tulips, because we've got these forms that are getting light and then rolling around to the dark. And I think the selection of yellow greens is a logical one to darken the yellow and cool it off for the shaded side of the yellow tulips, for example. So I just want to point out these 2 pastels are basically the same value. They're really close. But this one right here has more saturation. It's got more of a color note to it. This is more muted. So that's what I mean by saturation. I have a tray here of more muted yellow greens, blue greens, kind of green grays, and violets that I anticipate using in the vase, because again, I'm not going to put the detail in the vase. So I'm going to kind of minimize that in terms of its color integrity too, and introduce more muted hues there. That's what I'm anticipating. But it's helpful, I think, initially, even when you're beginning to work, to acknowledge the value differences and the saturation differences in your palette. I imagine using this very light valued saturated yellow for the portion of the yellow tulip that's in illumination. And then, as I said a moment ago, I'm going to the yellow green tulips, or yellow greens for the darker side of the yellow tulip. I've got red oranges and light values for the red orange highlights on the red tulips. I've got darker reds, still saturated, darker reds with more of a violet tint, a little darker in value for the red tulips. For the red violet tulips, I've got red, kind of a redder red violet versus a bluer red violet, if you will, for the shaded side of the red violet tulips. So I'm getting myself set to work. But I know that when I start applying these colors, they might look a little different than they look in my palettes. And that has to do, again, once again, with the dynamic quality of color. So I want to talk briefly about how I think about color so that you are all able to anticipate how the colors will interact when we lay them side by side, on our painting. So that's why in your folder, you all have a copy of the 12 hue color wheel, which is a wonderful instrument for organizing ideas about color, for understanding how it works. And this particular color wheel is based on the 3 subtractive primaries, yellow, red, and blue. And you all know, many of you are watercolorists or paint with acrylics or oil paint, and you know the theory behind the subtractive color system. When you mix yellow and red together, you get orange. When you mix red and blue together, you get violet or purple, interchangeable names there. Yellow and blue, you get green. But I bet you know in practice that doesn't always happen, because you won't always achieve a vibrant green like this that's pictured on this 12 hue color wheel if you're mixing a yellow that's more orangey in its bias with a blue that's redder in its bias. You're actually going to get more of a olive green, more of a muted green, because of the biases of the primary, or the 2 primaries together. So we're talking right now theoretically. And then if you mix yellow and orange together, you get the tertiary yellow-orange, and so on for the perimeter of the wheel. A primary mixed with an adjacent secondary yields a tertiary. Those are the hyphenated names. So what's important after we do all of that, and what has bearing on us as pastel artists, is there's relationships that happen. And that is, colors end up directly opposed from one another, directly opposite, that we want to call primaries. So primaries are 2 colors that are opposite on the color wheel. Primaries, excuse me, complements are 2 colors that are opposite one another on the color wheel. Another way of describing them is that we could say they're power pairs, because they do some pretty cool things when we put them together. Those of you that paint, when you mix 2 complements together, when you mix yellow with violet, when you mix blue with orange, indeed, when you mix yellow-green with red-purple, or red-orange with blue-green, you get a neutral. And that's what this gray disc represents in the center of the circle. It's representative of the admixture of all of the primaries. When you mix yellow and purple or violet together, in essence, you're mixing yellow with blue and red. So you're going to have an admixture of all 3 of the primaries. And they neutralize one another. They reduce the intensity of one another. In theory, they create the gray, but in actuality, as many of you know, they create muddy browns. So that's important. I mean, I don't mix my pastels much. It's certainly possible to mix pastels. I don't do that because I don't do it as a rule. I do it sometimes to tweak colors on my painting surface, but I find too often it compromises the brilliance of the color. So I'm much more apt to pick a color from my palette and put it on my painting and let it stand as it is. But but it's important to know about these mixtures, as I'm sure all of you do. But the other thing that the power pairs do, that the complements do, when they are laid side by side, they intensify one another. They enhance one another. They really up the ante and make one another look richer and more exciting. And that, I think, comes directly into play when we work with pastel, because we are laying colors down side by side. And I want to be able to anticipate this interaction of color. So this dynamic quality of color. And to show you what I mean, I have just a couple of samples here. I have an example here of the same red. I cut this in half, but I'm going to place the red on the orange and the red on the green. And whoa, voila, the red on the green looks so much more red, doesn't it? So much more vivid. The red on the orange, those are two adjacent colors on the color wheel. They don't have nearly the vibrancy. This doesn't have the vibrancy or the vitality that the red has on the green. So I think we would call this, a very vibrant, screaming red, whereas the red on the green has a much duller quality to it. Ditto with, here's another example, an orange, same orange rectangle. I'm going to place it on red, which is an analogous or an adjacent color on the color wheel, place it on blue, and the blue background enhances the orange and makes it appear much more vibrant and more orange, doesn't it? It's much more of an orange definition. If anything, the orange on the red feels a little light because the red background is dark. So value here, you see this simultaneous contrast of value becoming a factor too. And that was what was happening on that green paper. Now here's a yellow, same exact yellow. I'm going to put it on red, orange, and put it on a violet, which is yellow's complement. And which yellow is screaming yellow? The yellow on the violet. The yellow on the red orange is not screaming yellow. It feels a little darker in value. And it's also, I think, becoming a little green in its character. And that's because the complement of red orange is blue green. So we're getting a little of that kind of spillage of the green, blue green into the yellow. So the yellow on the red orange feels a little greener, doesn't it? It looks like one of the yellow greens I had in my palette. Now I'm going to do some real magic that I hope you'll appreciate. I have here a lovely red violet, and I'm going to put a red violet square on orange, the same red violet on green, and look how I changed the color. On the green background, the red violet looks much redder, doesn't it? And it also looks very light in value. The red violet on the orange doesn't look red violet at all anymore. It looks blue violet. So I've really changed that color because I put it in a different context. So this speaks to the dynamic quality of color, the way it's never going to be the same. In some scenarios, it'll be more apparent than in other scenarios, but it really, it's something we always need to reckon with. Last one is a neutral gray, the same neutral gray. I'm going to put it on the orange and I'm going to put it on the green. Well, I've changed the value of it, haven't I? The neutral gray on the green feels very light in value as compared to that neutral gray on the orange, which feels darker. That's because of the different value of the background orange and the background green. But could you also begin to see, if we get closer to the camera, that perhaps the gray on the orange feels bluer and the gray on the green feels redder? I think it's there. If you can't see that, ask yourself if you can see a difference in temperature of the gray on the orange being bluer or cooler in temperature, and the gray on the green being warmer or redder in temperature. So, it's amazing how I can make a gray look colorful or sort of colorful just by changing its context. Now, when I mentioned a moment ago warms and cools, and we'll be reckoning with warms and cools on our picture here, generally speaking, one side of the color wheel is thought to be warm, and the other side of the color wheel is thought to be cool. And it's mainly because of associations we have with warm things like fire, light, heat, and cool things like the earth, the water, ice, snow, shadows and snow. So that would be this side of the color wheel, generally speaking. But remember what I said about colors being dynamic. They're always going to change. So let's look at that. Here is a lovely red-orange, warm, right? Feels warm. And I'll put this next to it, this red-violet. Well, when we compare them next to one another, this is definitely cooler than this. This has a warmth. It's actually even warmer now than it was all by itself, because we've got something that's cooler next to it. But look what happens to the red violet when I do this. All of a sudden, the red violet has a warmer kind of character to it, because again, we're seeing it in context with the blue. So another lesson in the dynamic quality of color, that it is always changing. And I'm going to do one final quickie before we get to work here on our painting. I have just 3 samples here of rather toothy pastel paper. I have Canson Metien's Pastel Premier Color Fix Canson Metien's. I have 4 sticks. This is a Unison pastel in violet. And let's just look how it changes depending upon the background surface. I've got like in essence 3 different violets there. Might be a little hard to pick up with the camera. So let's go with the lighter one. This is a Great American, a tint of red violet, and how I've changed it. I'm kind of disappointed with how the camera is reading this, but there you do see a difference. The red violet on the white is much darker. It's very light. On the black, it has a cooler quality. On the warm red orange, it has a warmer quality on the blue. Let's try this small stubby piece of Blue Earth pastel. We'll try to get some good coverage here. And the last one is the Jack Richardson yellow green. These I think will be easier for you to see. And we'll pick them up and see the difference in the pigments. And you can pick out certainly all of the pigments on the black are the lightest in value than they are on any of the other color samples. On the white, they're the darkest in value than any of the other color samples. The cooler colors tend to be warmer on the reds. The warmer colors are cooler on the blue background. So again, your palette is changeable. It's dynamic. It's never going to be the same depending upon the context, the background color, the background value of your support, and also the colors that you're putting next to it. Okay, so now we'll get to work on our painting. And I'm going, so Lois, if you would switch to the easel view again. And what I'm going to do, because this is a buff piece of paper and the background is pretty plain in the composition, it just has that yellow green on it. What I'm going to do is introduce a little bit of orange in the background to liven up the subsequent application of yellow green and then blue green in the background to create a maybe more dynamic color experience in that area. And I think in the practice painting that you have in your folder, I did that in the background. I did an underpainting in the background because I anticipated wanting to create a little bit more liveliness. And you can see the red-orange kind of peeking through in spots. So as I do this, and so this comes back to the question we had earlier, where I've got the drawing down, but I'm actually using this application of the underpainting as an opportunity to refine the contour of my tulips on the edge. So I'm not always sticking to what I had done with the charcoal. I'm making corrections. I'm going to move this tulip over a little bit and eliminate, see what I mean about the pastel covers the vine charcoal. It really pretty much eliminates it. And we're going to actually be going over this background again with even, with the yellow greens and with the blue greens. So let's see where. Let's come down here. I am going to also introduce a little bit of this yellow or orange as an underpainting for some of these tulips, especially the yellow tulips, because they are so light and wonderfully warm. And I think just having that underpainting there will be fun to react against. I'll let some of it kind of remain in the final composition. I may cover up most of it, we'll see. The leaves on the bottom of the composition are noticeably warmer. They're getting a little bit of light, or maybe it's just those particular leaves and stems are not as blue, they're not as dark in value. So I think just for the heck of it, I might introduce a little bit and just block in the solid area, amassing all the leaves together. And this also helps me with the position of the various forms. Let me just get this in, see where we're headed with this. Maybe. Now, this is a complement, pretty much, of what I'm going to be introducing on top of it. red orange is a complement of blue green. I'm going to have the blue greens over here. I'm going to have yellower greens over here. These really are more analogous colors to what I anticipate introducing on top of it. But a fun thing to do is to introduce a complement underneath a color, just to create more intensity of that color. And let's try that just again, just to see what happens. I don't know if I wanna, maybe a yellow green under this red tulip here. Because this actually red tulip is one of the lightest, because it is, it's kind of leaning over into the white. Just, we'll see what happens. I haven't done this on a practice painting, so I'm not sure I'm gonna like it, but that's okay. That's what picture making is about. It's about taking risks and just, exploring the what ifs. What will happen if I do this? What will happen if I maybe introduce a little bit of violet over here? This is a dark. Or a little bit of violet under here. We'll just see what happens. Now, I'm not going to put the underpainting everywhere. I think I'll let it go as it is. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to blend the dry application of pastel into the paper a little bit with this pastel, pan pastel sponge, which is a good tool for pushing stuff in the surface, because I want to make sure I have enough of the tooth still on the paper so I can put subsequent applications in. It also darkens the value of the, oh, you know what I wanted to do? I also wanted to introduce this over the vase, because I see a lot of peekaboos in the vase. And I see lights in it. So I'm gonna lay that in there. Maybe for that daisy underneath here, I might just put a little bit of a, so I'm still building from general shapes of darks. There's changes within the context of the leaves and the stems right there, but it is a mass of dark. And that's okay for now. That's going to be a mass of dark. That's going to be a mass of dark. We'll build on that. Okay. So now I think we're good to go. I don't have a method of working from dark to light or light to dark. If anything, as you've seen, I'm more about building up, maybe from the general to the specific to a point, but always maintaining the structure of value differences. I think it's going to be important next to get in a sense of where we're headed with the value differences on the tulips. So let's just get those in here. So let's get a sense of where we're going with the warm side of the tulip. And this is where, you know what, I'm going to do one more thing. Here is the underpainting I used in the background. Here's the underpainting I used for some of the yellow tulips. Here is the underpainting that I used for the daisies. And is this the, nope, too dark. Yeah, and this was the underpainting I used for the leaves. So I can experiment now with the subsequent applications of pigments, like on top of the yellow for the yellow tulips. So we'll go there. for the illuminated yellow, like right in here, we have a really light yellow. See how light that is right there? Picking up the light. I see a light yellow shade. And I was pretty confident that was going to work for my light. But I also always can experiment out here. Now it is a little bit darker underneath, but it's getting some reflected light from the red tulip. So I might actually go, let's see, maybe we'll use this orangey, kind of a yellow ochre orange for the shaded portion of this tulip right there. There we go. That works pretty well. I'm happy with that at this juncture. We'll probably revisit it, but I've captured the light and dark, that value relationship here. For the tint that I used, I want to also mention I never use whites in my picture. If I have something that's very light, and there's several of them here, on the yellow tulips, on the red violet tulips, I use a tint that still has some kind of color identity. I'm reluctant to use white because white kind of takes the color, experience away. It detracts from the color experience. Let's see, how is this for a green? Maybe I need this to be a little greener. See where it helps to have a color sample strip over here? I'm interested in putting the cooler front of this yellow tulip on, and I think it needs to be a little darker in value than this particular pastel. So I'm going to use, well, that one doesn't suit me either. No, this one might work for the cast shadow. The cast shadow has a bit of warmth to it, though. There we go. So now I want to ask myself, let's pull that out. The edge of the petal there is very light. What kind of value comparison can we make between the cooler side of the yellow tulip and the light side of this red violet tulip? It is pretty light in value.
Mary, can I just ask you a question about the greenish complement underpaint on the red tulip? Is it a warm green?
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's a yellow, I would say a yellow green. I guess I want to keep it warm because the tulip is warm. I don't want it really dark in value. I want it to be close in value to the red that I'm going to be putting down shortly. And I just was asking myself, but also kind of rhetorically asking all of you to compare on the red violet tulip, the one in the upper left, compare the light value of the right side of that with the darker value of the front of that yellow tulip. And there, when we whip out the black and white photograph, we can see that those values are really close. So the red violet, it's light, but it's not going to be as light in value as the light on the yellow tulip. But it's still, it's closer to the darker value on the tulip. But in terms of the red violet, it's going to have a light quality. So let's see if we just, that is a little bit dark. One thing my palette does not have are good, light, warm red violets. And I don't, and I've looked for them from different manufacturers because this is kind of a cool light that I'm just putting in here for the red violet tulip. And I'll put in another one here, anticipating this area. Actually, I don't think you can see it. Anticipating this area. Nope, you can't see it.
That's good.
Right here. You see that really light? You know, I've got the light, the value's okay, but the temperature isn't. No doubt, as you're working today, you're probably encountering some colors that are maybe not the exact value you want, not the exact color you want, not the exact temperature you want. And sometimes that's a good thing to have happen because it forces us to kind of make an adjustment and wing it or punt, as they say in football. And so that's okay to do that. That's sometimes when exciting stuff happens. And here for the dark side of the tulip. And there are peekaboo greens coming through that are kind of interesting here. The green, the violet in the back here is very dark. So now I've kind of shifted greens. I've gone just on a whim, which is how I typically work. Again, I don't work from dark to light. I don't work from light to dark, but I always work comparing one entity to another. Is this is going to be dark compared to the red of the tulip. And as I do this, I'm repositioning, I'm redrawing the edge of the tulip, redrawing the central part of the tulip too.
Mary, is there any way that you can move your board over so that we can see the reference photo at the same time? Marvelous, thank
And
you.
I wonder, okay, we're going to adjust the camera a little bit. Now it's interesting, the camera is making these tulips appear to be quite dark in value. I don't perceive them to be quite as dark on my painting. Where else do we have? And so I'm playing now with all the darks, getting those darks of the red violets in. Okay, we've got the darks in. Now there's actually a beautiful reflected warmth coming off the yellow tulip that's tucked in that cluster on the top. It's reflecting a light onto the red violet tulip that's much orangier and kind of red. So what the heck, we'll just note that in there like that. Now, what I want to do before I go too much further is get in some of the red for the red tulips, and that's a little orange. See the green poking through the red? So as a color experience, it's creating something kind of interesting. The red on the red tulip on the bottom here, I perceive as being much more violet in its character because it's kind of tucked away. And it does have a lovely red-orange kind of edge to it here. And as does this. So I'm dancing everywhere. I'm kind of putting color in here, color in there. It's very much about color. But what's driving it is a sense of value differences. And look at the value on the inside of this tulip here. It's very, very dark. And so that's kind of an important note to get in. We've got a dark over here. Dark here. And let's put a little bit of red in the back. Okay, one thing that we need to do before we go too much further is get in the darkness of those leaves. because they're a wonderful kind of counterpoint for the lighter values. So let's knock those darks in. And as I do this, I'm kind of redrawing the position of the red tulip. There's a little bit of a daisy poking through here. That's a nice opportunity for a little bit of yellow green in there, a little bit of a relief. So I'm using a dark, very dark green. There is a difference in the leaf kind of cluster under the red violet tulip, but I'm just going to treat it as one flat shape. Oops, wrong one. Tulip. So now I see I need to redraw or repaint or paint for the first time the yellow tulip kind of cuts down under here. There's a bit of a yellow back in there. And we'll come back to the red violet tulip right there in a moment. Okay. And then we have darks over here. And here's an example of me not paying attention to values that I see in the photograph. I can let it go, or I can correct it and make it more like what I see here. These leaves are very dark on the right side of the red tulips right in here. As it moves out, the light, the illumination is actually coming through the yellow green of the stems and the leaves. And we pick that up as a lighter, slightly lighter value. I made it too light there. So, you know, I can leave it as is and I might let it alone for now, or I can go back and tweak it. And that's the kind of thing, what I mean when I say I work kind of, you know, building on something general and getting more specific. I'll let these things happen. You know, I won't be always so restricted or so careful about the value relationships. I mean, they're very, very important, but I might depart from them here and there. Now, one thing I'm going to do before another second goes by, and that is going to be get in a little bit of a light yellow here of the tulip. It's kind of the yellow tulip that's poking itself out, and the daisies that's down here. And I'm being pretty general, looking for light shapes, light. But then we begin to get darker values on the underside of the tulips, where it's turning away from the light source. Kind of gets a little warm too. And the warmth happens because of the reflected lights from like a red tulip to a yellow tulip, or a yellow tulip to a red violet tulip. But it also happens because of the, you know, the light goes through some of these petals and creates a warmth as the petals reflect light, you know, through them, or the light passes through them. We could say it that way. That might be more accurate. So I'm using this warmer dark value for parts of the yellow daisy. Okay, now one thing that we need to get to before too much longer is a bit of a reference to the fact that the background is yellow green. It's not going to be orange, but we're going to keep some of this orange there. We're going to let it poke through just for the sake of color, just to have a fun color. See the peekaboos there? Now I do need to amend the red. Oops.
Technical support.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Spam. It's into everything.
Okay. So now we want to, again, I want to get that yellow green in. I like the yellow green because it is cooler than the red. But what's happening now, actually, there's some really fun things happening. I see the underpainting that I had in the back. Underneath I had the green under the red tulip, and it's kind of creating a nice halo around the red tulip that I think is kind of interesting to look at. I'll show you, maybe we could get a little bit closer. See the green back in there? And that green kind of spilled out from under the red tulip. In the spirit of creating a color experience that kind of is accidental there, I think it's a pleasurable experience. I like that aspect of the, of the relationship. So I'm going to leave it. Now, let's see, I'm going to halt the background application. And since I was doing it right up here where the reds are, I'm going to cut in with a little bit of a lighter red in front, and then introduce more of a violet red where the tulip is facing away from the light source there. And I like that. Okay, now while I'm at it up here, I see I can do a little work on the red violet tulip to make it feel more accurate in terms of the right here, the dark, light, darker relationship. So we go from a petal that's facing away from the light source to one getting illumination to another facing away. And then we get that nice reflected light. That white is that tint is a little too light. So we'll just tweak it there a wee bit. This was the one I had. The photograph, of course, is the camera's interpretation of these colors. And we might see suggestions in spots, of colors that we could pull from our palette to describe the lights and darks, the warms and cools, the red violets, the blue violets. I do on this red violet tulip that's way up top, in the uppermost top of the composition, I really see a cool blue on the left side of the on the left side of the composition. Do I want one like that? And this is where having a strip is helpful. You can do a little testing, see how it comes out. And well, that might work a little bit. Not as blue as I think I want it to be. So I am going to scoot away from the easel and get a bluer violet. Okay, let's see how this one works right here. Yeah, it's bluer. Can you pick that up? Usually, and I think where it's coming from is I have a gray wall over to the left, which was to the left of this setup when I photographed it. Reflected light will always be cool. That's the way it is. It's never warm. So that's why I'm okay with introducing, what the heck, a little bit of this blue, kind of blue violet, much bluer, into the left side of these tulips that are on the left, because I do see some lights on the left side. It's not all going from light to dark. The left side that you would anticipate being in shadow is actually a little bit in light, because it's getting reflected light from my light gray wall. This is kind of fun. Now I'm introducing a warmer light for that. Maybe. So again, comparing. Where's the lights? I'm leaving some of the information about the center of the tulips, the fold of the petals. I mean, I don't need to put all of that in. I'm really trying to capture the essence of the color combination, and that needs to be better. If you can't get something light enough, if you darken the things around it, you can make what you have for a light look lighter. Let's see if this, not quite. We'll let it go for now. We have to get back to the yellow tulip in the background. So I'm working everywhere at once. How are you all doing? Are you working everywhere?
Everyone seems to be working. Yes, I can see them all busy.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to go back to the background again and come back up where I was before I decided the tulip needed a little bit more detail. Cut down. Now, as I move to the left side of the composition, I know that that's where the cast shadow is going to be on the bottom. And I'm going to really push the fact that the background is cooler on the left side. And I'm going to do it mainly to have the opportunity to introduce some blue-greens. And I do see something else I need to do on the red tulip back here. So it's always I'm kind of looking everywhere and thinking about where I'm headed here. I got carried away. I'm just going to work on me. background, but I'm not. I'm still on the tulips. Okay, so let's introduce a little bit more of a green blue back in here. And as we lay this in, I also see, I might add a little bit of it even within the bouquet itself, picking up a reference to the background. I see here the edge of the yellow tulip has light on it. I can quickly reach back into the yellow palette, pull out a light, just to get that in there. Maybe. Okay, now we'll come down with this same blue-green. And as I lay it in, I'm refining the edge of the yellow tulip in the background. There. There's a nice leaf coming off the left side of the daisy. So there may be things that you're seeing that you didn't see before. Now that you're putting in, more detail, like, oh, I didn't notice that. That happens to me all the time. And I think that's, as you examine something. So see the lovely peekaboos we have. Are you getting it on your ground? If you did do an underpainting, let some of it peek through. We're not trying to cover everything. Now I'm going to go to the flowers underneath, or the stems and the leaves underneath, and block in the darkness of them, they're different in character than the leaves on the top. And I'm doing it with the side of my pastel because I don't want to be fussy about describing every leaf. I might put some of them in, but not all of them. I think the viewer can figure out that, yeah, those are stems, those are leaves. We know these are tulips. Just once again, as I do this, I am looking for value shapes, not necessarily a shape of a leaf or a stem, but general value shapes. There's some variation in light dark amongst these leaves and stems at the base. There is this little guy that comes up and does a curlicue in front of the tulip, and the top of it is light in value because it's catching the light, but it's a little bit more muted. We'll just do that. That could be enough, maybe. Do something like that. I bet you may not have noticed this, but there's a lovely leaf that's kind of sticking out of the right side of the composition, and it's just a hint of a bluer green than the yellow green of the background. It kind of comes out like that, and that's not going to be, maybe we'll use this. It's kind of a very cool. Okay, now the daisy that's tucked underneath is really a It's very dark in value. It's a real dark yellow green. Let's see if we can get it about like that. It does pick up some warm yellows, but the warm yellows that it picks up are not really light in value compared to the yellows on the other daisies. What is dark is the center of the daisy. And I'm going to use one of my real dark. That might work. Something like that. Yeah, that's pretty good value. If you squint your eyes, you know, that helps you to see these value shapes in the photograph. Okay, now let's get to the vase a little bit before we do much more. The vase is, you know, I see it as rather neutral in color because perhaps the glass reflect, you know, it acts like a film on top of the color. I do readily see, though, the value differences, especially around the daisy. And to do that, do I want this? No, that's too dark. This might work. This one, we'll go with this for right now. We might need to darken it. So what kind of a dark shape, what kind of shape is it that the stem can, you know, kind of morphs into on the right side of the daisy underneath? Boy, I think we do want it dark there. I always can tweak it and make it lighter by putting something on top of it. Okay, and I think we do need to move that over. Yeah, I just made an adjustment in moving the vase over from where I had it. It just needs to budge over a little bit. Trying to tweak the correct value of this. Okay, now for the, I want to go back to the vase. This would be the stem coming down, but the, and I see violet as being a color opportunity for the upper part of the vase, especially on the right side. That's kind of, it's a cast shadow, I think, coming from the daisy on the right side. And then in the center of the, that's not gonna work. We need something like this or this. In the center of the vase, it gets a little lighter in value. There's the stems, the lighter stems kind of coming down like this. And there's the stems on the bottom. So I'm just generalizing the position of the stems. I'm looking for value shapes. So the violet that I had here describes the right side of the vase. And it also describes the water level right here. We've got a little bit of a shadow off to the left of the main clump of the stems. And then the left side of the vase I see is kind of a green. So see where I'm headed with this? I'm keeping it really loose and general in terms of its description. So let's see. Let's come down here. It's hard to get the right dark in for the vase without getting the light of the background in. That's something we really need to do. I need to go back and work on that daisy. So now we've got the light in, and for the underside, you know, I work a lot with my pastels on their side to just block in a passage of color. You know, it's general, it's about the mark, and I like that quality. So sometimes I don't even blend it or change it. So let's just get a bit more in down here on the bottom for the vase, and then we're going to go to the other daisies and the rest of the background and see where we've landed. And I'm searching for a blue-green that I don't seem to have here, a muted blue-green, which I want for the bottom of the vase. But we'll just have to, again, adapt. And adapting sometimes does yield, you know, some cool surprises. Let's see, thank you, my assistant. This might. Yeah, I don't want to give too much information about the vase because I really don't want the viewer to go there. I want the viewer to see the tulips before anything else. So let's leave the vase alone. Let's go to the daisy on the left, which is, actually, this needs a little bit of a dark here. And, you know, I do see some warms there, and I'm really responding intuitively as I lay these in. I think the thing I need to look for is the value relationship, and this is too dark. I think it's too dramatic a value there. I want something a little bit lighter, and I want to introduce more yellow greens around it. However, that yellow green is a little too light in value. And we have and the orange that I just put in a moment ago is a little too light in value. I wanted the orange to evoke the reflected kind of light, what little light there is in this daisy here. It's the light's passing through some of the petals, and it's creating a warmer quality. Ditto with this one right in here, but it's, and I'm really generalizing that daisy on the bottom, but it's not bad. Oops. Okay, we need to do a wee bit with this. So here in this, for example, I'm not adhering to the accurate, you know, I'm not making it exactly like it is. I'm trying to capture the essence of it. And I think that really is what impressionistic painting is about. you know, I don't need to put down all of the details exactly as I see them. Boy, I can't get that brown right in there. So if I can't get the color right, if I can get the value right, I'll be okay. And that might work there. Yeah. Now, when you make a mistake with pastel, what you can do is take a stiff bristle brush and lift whatever it is off the surface. And that's what I'm doing here, because I was getting too much of a contrast there. I think I want. Okay. Alrighty, now let's go back to the background and get in some of the blue-green background to outline this daisy and kind of cut some of it off there. Now, a couple of things I want to do. We're almost out of time, but let's look at it now. And I do see that I need to introduce more darks up in the red tulip here, in the violet tulip here. So let's get the reds and the violet tray out. And then we might have to call it a day, because I want to have time to answer any of your questions. I think you might agree that the most interesting parts of the painting are the ones where we've got the underpainting. And I know I tucked that away over here. So I'm using my finger here just to soften the pastel. And there's a little bit of light traveling through there. Let's go in with. We need that green to darken the green over here. I like the yellow tulips. We need a darker purple in the inside of this. So not that purple, we need a darker one, a bluer purple. Ooh, I do see. So as I work, I see things and I clarify things and I make it maybe more refined, but still I'm really trying to maintain the immediacy, you know, and I think that partially comes from the type of mark I'm making, but maybe also from really trying just to feel the subject and not articulate it with a great deal of detail, keeping it kind of open and capturing just these value shapes that really do say enough about the form And when you overlay a color experience on the value shape, that I think is when some interesting stuff happens. You know, I'm looking at the cast shadow there on the tulip. It almost could get darker. Well, maybe that's okay. And maybe we'll darken that up. You know, you always can go back and tweak. You know, this could have easily another hour's worth of work on it.